Welcome back to Dish and DAS Administration 1 course FR-100. My name is David and I'll be your instructor for this module. In Module 3, you will learn about the frame account types. More specifically, we will focus on non-persistent desktops. I will demonstrate how to create a frame account within an already configured customer organization. We will then begin to explore some of the settings and best practices for the Sandbox image. So if you are ready, let's get started. Before users can be assigned and granted access to applications, you must first create, configure, and publish desktops from a template. To do so, you begin by creating a frame account. Think of a frame account as the container that holds the template. Session settings, capacity plans, user assignments, launchpads, and of course the operating system and installed applications. This list of steps describes the typical workflow administrators will follow to create and set up a new frame account. There are two distinct types of frame accounts available to select from. It is important to understand the differences, as this choice will enable and disable certain features and behaviors of the resulting desktop pool, and also determine how you will manage the user desktops going forward. Regardless of which type you select, you can create multiple accounts within an organization of both types if your use case requires it. When we say persistent, we mean what happens to the operating system's state once a user's session has finished and the virtual machine is rebooted. In the persistent type, a desktop is treated much like issuing a physical laptop asset to an employee. It is theirs to use daily and can be managed using traditional software such as asset management, RMM, or MDM solutions. Each virtual machine is created only once from this template and is manually assigned to the user until it is either reassigned or destroyed. In contrast, a non-persistent workload type is stateless. When a user requests a session, a fresh copy from the template is created to a new VM for the duration of the session. Once the session is over and the user disconnects, the VM is powered off and destroyed. So what happens to any data that needs to be saved across sessions? I'll cover that in a later lesson on profile drives. The ultimate virtual workspace is dependent on bringing three things together. 1. Compute and associated infrastructure like network, IDP, AD, etc. 2. User persona and data. 3. Applications and data. Bring these together correctly and you will keep users on task, allowing for recovery operations to have minimal impact on production. Ask yourself, what happens when something fails? How do you keep users working? And how do you recover? Is the former dependent on the later? Where is the application data stored? What are the continuity plans for the applications? I will now demonstrate how to create a frame account within an organization called Training. Click Create Account link at the top right. Give this account a meaningful name. In this case, I am labeling it with this module number. You can also change the URL to something shorter if you wish. I will discuss the URL in more detail later. Next, choose the infrastructure provider. I will select AWS for this demonstration. Also, choose the region where this account will be served from. I am using US East 1 in Northern Virginia. The next selections are for the networking configuration. I will use the default selection and will discuss networking in depth in a later module. Click Next to continue the dialog. On this page, notice the radio button for Persistent Desktop. I will leave this turned off for non-persistent type. Select the operating system type. Note I will use a pre-configured frame-provided base image instead of bring your own. Select the backing instance type and size. You can configure additional types to this account later when adjusting capacity settings. Set the disk size and the initial capacity. It is best to leave capacity at 1 for now and increase it later. Next, I'm going to set this account with an automatic termination date since it is to be short-lived. For most production workloads, this option should be turned off by unchecking the box. You can change this value in settings once the account is created. Lastly, set the time zone, then click Next. On this final screen, I will verify all of the settings, and if it all looks good, I'll go ahead and click Create to kick off the creation tasks. That's it. I just created a non-persistent desktop pool. Now that I have created a new non-persistent frame account, let's explore some of the features and settings of the Sandbox. Recall that the Sandbox, also known as a golden image, is the main template from which end-user desktops will be cloned. Desktop administrators use the Sandbox to patch the base operating system, install and update applications, and make other configuration and changes specific for your business requirements. For non-persistent desktops, the Sandbox image must be generalized and sealed prior to the publish operation. Windows machines call this process sysprep. On this screen, you will notice a few important features presented by the control panel. On the right side, the Applications pane lists installed software that has been onboarded. This allows you to create custom application launchpads, a feature we will explore in a later module. In the lower centered pane, you will also see a list of saved backups or restore points. Remember, the Sandbox is where you go to test your installed applications. If you look next to the Power On and Publish commands at the top of this pane, you will notice a 3 dots menu. Clicking on it will present some Sandbox-specific commands. If you need to test the difference between CPU and GPU workloads instance types, you can set the type of cloud instance that will back your Sandbox by selecting Change Instance Type. If the base Sandbox image requires more disk space, you can increase it. Remember, you cannot shrink disks. Reducing disks is an advanced topic and is not something available within the control panel. If you need to revert your Sandbox back to the master image state, you can do so. The master image is one that is either DISHN provided on one of the cloud providers or a customer image you have created that is tagged appropriately. Whichever the case, it is the image you selected when you initially created this frame account. Session settings are typically set at the frame account level. Because the Sandbox is special and only used by administrators, you may need to override certain settings. For example, if you disabled the download-upload file feature for your users, but need to upload a software installation package from your workstation onto the Sandbox, you might want to enable the upload feature in the Sandbox's session settings. Another feature that we will discuss in more detail in a later module is Clone to Another Account. This feature allows you to replicate a Sandbox to other frame accounts. Lastly, you can adjust the shutdown timeout to change how long your Sandbox stays on before it is powered off. This can be useful, so you can perform unattended tasks or leave something happening in the background. To override session settings, you must first deselect the Use Account Settings radio button. Notice on the left side screenshot, the settings are grayed out. By default, the behavior is to use the same session settings as those set for the end users at the account level hierarchy. Once deselected, you will observe the features can now be altered specific to the Sandbox session. We will examine these settings more closely in an upcoming module. The Sandbox image relies upon the Frame Guest Agent, or FGA, to handle many of the features. As many virtualization and system administrators know, dealing with agents and keeping them updated is a challenge. Fortunately, DISHN engineers have baked in a mechanism to keep this agent and our other platform updates current, with little to no intervention from our customers. This is achieved by joining a deployment group. We know that customers have different requirements when it comes to change, and therefore offer 3 deployment groups for handling when updates are applied. Early adopters receive cutting-edge features and bug fixes as they are published. Standard group, most production accounts, are updated 2 to 6 business days following a successful early adopter rollout. For those customers in the trailing group, updates will be scheduled for 2 business days after standard. Here are some best practices that we have learned over the years for managing your Sandbox. This may sound obvious, but I can't stress this first one enough. Always back up your Sandbox prior to making any changes. You should create an iterative process to make and save changes to reduce the amount of rework in the event something goes horribly wrong. The frame publish process will automatically take a backup. There is also a limit to the number of backups retained. Our documentation discusses backup and restore in far greater detail. Second, remember you can override session settings for the Sandbox. You should adjust these to accommodate your maintenance requirements. Third, always use the control panel controls to manage the power state and reboots during Sandbox operations. Avoid using the cloud provider or virtualization software to issue reboot or startup and shutdown commands. Fourth, never leave your Sandbox joined to a Windows domain prior to publishing. Fifth, optimize the image. We will discuss this further in the module on publishing. Sixth, for domain-joined desktops, use DISHN's sysprep helper tool to check if your image is ready. 7th, verify that the time zone, and date is set correctly. 8th, clear application history and caches where available. Also clean up downloads, uploads, temp directories, and empty the trash or recycle bin prior to publishing. Lastly, complete all Windows updates, disable the Windows Update service and any other services that might install or update other software. Since these desktops are non-persistent, you don't want updates or changes happening outside of the controlled Sandbox image. Alright, so that's it for this module. Let's take a minute to review what we learned. A non-persistent desktop is also referred to as a stateless desktop. It is reset after each use to the previous published state. I then demonstrated the creation of a new frame account. Finally, we learned the Sandbox is the base image used to build the desktops in the pool. Session settings can be adjusted for Sandbox administrators, and deployment groups determine when updates are performed. This concludes the lesson module. Be sure to check out the other videos in the series that make up the full course. Thanks so much for watching.